You'll die alone anyway, Ellie. Nobody will even notice. Those were the exact words my son said to me that night, the night everything inside me cracked. I can still hear those words echoing in my head like a cruel song I never wanted to learn. It wasn't a stranger who said them. It wasn't a neighbor. It was my own flesh and blood, my son, Nathan. I'm Eleanor Thompson, though most people call me Ellie. I'm 67 years old. I've lived in Springfield, Illinois, almost all my life. I was a wife for 41 years, the mother for 40. And in all those years, I thought love was something that could never disappear. I thought family was forever. I was wrong. I live in a modest two-story house at the end of Willow Lane. White paint, peeling a little at the corners, and a porch swing my late husband built with his bare hands. That swing once held my babies and my dreams. But dreams have a way of fading quietly when no one bothers to hold on to them with you. Nathan had come over that night with his wife, Amanda. We were sitting at the dining table, the same table where we used to have Thanksgiving dinners, messy birthday cakes, and late-night talks. But that night, the air was different. Heavy. Cold. I had brought up something I'd been holding in for months. How distant they'd become. How the phone calls turned into text messages. How visits became rare, and when they did happen, they felt more like an obligation than love. Nathan leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said it with a calmness that still chills me. You'll die alone anyway, Mom. Nobody's gonna live forever. Amanda didn't say a word. She just sipped her wine and avoided my eyes. I felt something snap inside me. When you've spent your entire life raising someone, sacrificing for them, building a home, believing that love will be returned even in your gray years, those words don't just hurt. They bury you alive. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not right then. I simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you for being honest, Nathan." But deep inside, something shifted. The truth is, my life hadn't always been this lonely. I raised Nathan alone after my husband, Henry, passed away 12 years ago. Heart attack. Quick. Unexpected. One morning he was here, sipping black coffee on the porch swing. By noon, he was gone. Nathan was in his late 20s then, just starting his life. I never expected him to give up his dreams for me. I just thought he'd still remember me. I became invisible after that. Not all at once, but piece by piece. One missed birthday here, one forgotten holiday there, until my existence felt like a shadow on the edge of their perfect lives. That night, after Nathan and Amanda left, I sat on the porch swing. It creaked under my weight, but I liked the sound. It reminded me that something, even if it's just old wood, still notices I'm here. The wind was cold. My hands trembled, but my heart burned with something fierce and unfamiliar. Not just pain. Not just anger. Determination. I whispered to myself, they'll remember me. Not as the woman they abandoned, but as the woman who built her own ending. I didn't know exactly how then, but I knew I wasn't going to just fade away quietly like some forgotten chapter in their story. This was going to be my story, and they were going to remember every page. That night, I made a promise to myself, not out of revenge, but out of love for the woman I used to be. The one who laughed without asking for permission. The one who mattered. I locked the front door, turned off the porch light, and stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. My reflection looked tired, yes. Wrinkled, yes. But defeated? No. Something had awakened. I whispered softly, "You won't die alone, Ellie. You'll live loudly. And they'll never forget it." That was the night I decided my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Nathan's words rang louder, sharper. "You'll die alone anyway, Mom." For years, I believed growing old meant becoming smaller, like life was something that happened to you, not something you could shape anymore. But at 67, I realized something powerful. I still had time. I still had a voice. And maybe I still had a purpose. The next morning, I brewed my coffee the same way Henry used to, strong, black, with a pinch of sugar. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the sun rise over Willow Lane. Normally, that sight would make me ache for the past. but this time it felt like a beginning. I picked up an old notebook from the drawer. It had a faded floral cover, torn at the edges. I had once used it to write grocery lists and reminders. But that morning, I wrote a different kind of list. 1. Find something new, something just for me. 2. Make them remember. 3. Live louder than their silence. I stared at that third line for a long time. Live louder. I didn't even know what that meant yet. But it sounded right. For years, I'd lived in this house waiting for people to visit me, waiting for calls, waiting to matter again. But now, I didn't want to wait anymore. I wanted to build something that carried my name even after I was gone. I started small. I pulled out my old gardening gloves and walked to the backyard. Henry and I had once spent hours planting tulips there every spring. After he died, I let it wither. Weeds grew taller than the flowers. But as I pushed my fingers into the cool dirt, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't just about flowers. It was about claiming my life back. Later that afternoon, I drove to the Springfield Community Center. I hadn't been there in years. The front doors creaked like they were as old as I was, but the moment I stepped inside, something unexpected happened. People smiled at me. A woman at the desk, maybe in her 50s, asked gently, "Can I help you, ma'am?" I told her I was looking for volunteer work. I didn't know why those words came out so confidently, but they did. She handed me a flyer for their after-school art program. "We need someone to help organize materials and guide the kids," she said. "You'd be perfect." Perfect. It had been so long since anyone used that word for me. I signed up on the spot. Over the next few weeks, my days began to change. I would wake up early, water the garden, and then drive to the community center. At first, I was just helping the kids set up paints and brushes. But soon, they started calling me Miss Ellie. They'd hug me. They'd tell me about their drawings. And for the first time in years, someone actually listened to me. One day, a little girl named Grace gave me a crumpled drawing. It was a woman with gray hair, smiling under a tree full of flowers. She said, "That's you, Miss Ellie. You make everything look happy." I went home and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I hadn't felt seen in so long. Around that time, Nathan called me, well, actually, Amanda did. She asked, almost reluctantly, if I could watch their dog while they went on a weekend trip. Not once did she ask how I'd been. Not once did she sound like family. I said yes, but something had changed. I didn't feel desperate for their attention anymore. I felt detached. Not bitter, just clearer. I knew my worth wasn't tied to their visits or their approval. One evening after the art program, I sat on the porch swing again. The tulips I'd replanted were blooming. My hands smelled of paint and soil. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I whispered to the wind, "This is just the beginning." I didn't know it then, but these quiet steps were about to become something much bigger. Something no one, not even Nathan, could ignore. Because I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was building a legacy. The strangest thing about rebuilding your life is how quietly it begins and how loudly it grows. By the third month of volunteering at the community center, I had more purpose than I'd felt in years. People knew my name again. Children hugged me like I mattered. But most importantly, I started recognizing myself in the mirror. But my journey wasn't just about feeling alive again. It was about making sure I'd never be forgotten. One evening, after finishing an art class with the kids, I stopped by a local cafe downtown. It was the same place Henry and I used to go on Sunday mornings. The wooden tables, the cinnamon smell, the tiny bells on the door, it all felt like stepping into a memory. I sat by the window with my tea when I overheard two women talking at the next table. They were in their 70s, laughing, planning a road trip to the Grand Canyon. One of them said, "I didn't wait for anyone. I just decided to live." Those words hit me like a warm wave. I realized something simple but powerful. I didn't have to wait for permission to live fully. The next day, I opened Henry's old desk drawer. Tucked inside was a file I hadn't touched since his passing, our savings, retirement plans, and the deed to the house. I stared at those papers, thinking of all the years I'd built a life that revolved around other people. My husband, my son, my family. But what had I built for me? I called my lawyer the next morning. Ellie, she said, are you sure about this? Yes, I answered. I want to update everything. For the first time in decades, my future wasn't being shaped for me. I was shaping it myself. I created a living trust. But instead of leaving everything to Nathan, as I once planned, I made some bold decisions. A significant part of my estate would go toward funding the community center's art program permanently. A scholarship in my name, the Eleanor Thompson Foundation for Creative Futures. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it out of clarity. Nathan had made it clear where I stood in his life. Now I was making it clear who I was in the world. Weeks passed. My confidence grew. I started taking weekend trips, short ones at first. St. Louis, Nashville, Chicago, places I'd always wanted to see, but never had the courage to visit alone. I'd send postcards to myself, writing, "See, Ellie? You're not alone. You're living." And then came the dinner. Nathan and Amanda invited me to their house after months. They said they wanted to talk. I arrived with a calm heart and a clear mind. Their living room looked like a magazine spread. Perfect furniture, perfect rugs, and not a trace of warmth. Amanda barely smiled, and Nathan cleared his throat nervously. He began, "Mom, we've been thinking about the house, about your future." I already knew where this was going. They wanted the house, or at least control of it. Maybe they thought I'd just hand over everything because I was old, alone, and desperate for their company. I sipped the water Amanda had placed in front of me and said gently, "I've already made arrangements for my future, Nathan." His eyebrows furrowed. "What does that mean?" I smiled, not out of cruelty, but strength. "It means my home and my savings are secured, and they'll support something meaningful long after I'm gone." Amanda shifted uncomfortably. Nathan's voice sharpened. "Mom, are you seriously giving everything away to strangers?" "Not strangers," I said softly. "To children who need hope. To a place where I feel alive." The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging for their understanding. I wasn't shrinking to make them comfortable. Nathan clenched his jaw. "You're making a mistake." I shook my head.
"No, sweetheart."
I made my mistake when I let other people define my worth. I'm correcting that now. When I left their house that night, the air outside felt different. Colder, but freer. I walked slowly down their driveway, holding my purse close, and I felt proud. Not because I had won something, but because I had finally chosen me. Back home, I sat on the porch swing, the same place where I'd once whispered my promise to never be forgotten. This time, I didn't whisper. I said it out loud. I'm not dying alone. I'm living on my terms. What I didn't know then was that the storm was just beginning. Nathan wouldn't let this go so easily. And what came next would test everything I had built inside me. It didn't take long. Just 4 days after that dinner, Nathan showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the garden, pruning the tulips that had grown beautifully that spring. The wind was soft, the sky was clear, but the look on Nathan's face was anything but calm. "Mom, we need to talk," he said as he slammed his car door shut. He didn't even bother to greet me. His voice was sharp, the way it used to be when he was a teenager and didn't get what he wanted. I wiped my hands on my apron and stood up. "Then talk." He followed me up to the porch. I could see the anger in his eyes, not pain, just entitlement. "Amanda and I talked. We think you're not making rational decisions," he said. "You're old, Mom. You shouldn't be making choices like this alone." I felt a sting at the word old. But instead of shrinking, I straightened my back. "I've lived 67 years, Nathan. I think I can decide what happens to my life."
He scoffed.
"To your life? Or to my inheritance?" The words hit me like a slap. There it was, the truth I'd always known but never wanted to hear. All those distant calls, those polite smiles, they weren't out of love. They were out of expectation, out of what I could offer.
I didn't cry. Not this time.
I walked slowly to the porch swing and sat down. "Nathan," I said softly, "I raised you with love. I gave you everything I could. Not because I wanted something back, but because that's what mothers do. But I'm not a bank account. I'm not your safety net.
His jaw tightened.
This is about that stupid community center, isn't it? It's not stupid, I said firmly. It's the only place that made me feel alive again. It reminded me that I matter. He shook his head like I was a stubborn child. Mom, do you even hear yourself? Giving everything to strangers instead of your own family? You'll regret this. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I once rocked to sleep was long gone. In his place was a man who saw me as a convenience, not a person. Do you remember the last time you called me just to ask how I was? I asked. He frowned. This isn't about that. Yes, I whispered. It is. It's about everything you didn't see. All the birthdays you missed. The nights I sat here alone. The times I asked for just one visit, and you said you were busy. You built a life where I didn't fit in anymore. For the first time, Nathan looked uncomfortable. Not guilty, just trapped by the truth. I'm your mother, Nathan. Not your obligation. And if this is the only way you'll remember me, then so be it. His voice rose. People will think you've lost it. You'll die alone, Mom. Alone. No one will even be at your funeral. And there it was. The same cruel line he'd thrown at me that night. But this time it didn't break me. It built me higher. I stood slowly, my voice steady. Maybe I will die alone. But I'll die knowing I lived with dignity. And Nathan, people may not stand at my funeral because of blood, but they'll stand because they chose to love me. That's worth more than any inheritance. He stared at me, speechless. Amanda wasn't with him this time. I almost wondered if she told him to fix things or to fight harder. But I didn't care anymore. I walked to the front door and opened it. Nathan, I love you. I always will. But I will no longer let you make me feel small for wanting a life of my own. I deserve more than waiting for phone calls that never come. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. But pride held him back. He turned, got in his car, and drove off. The tires spat gravel, but the silence he left behind was strangely peaceful. I sat back on the porch swing and exhaled. The storm had come, just like I knew it would. But I was still standing. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the old photographs, the piano Henry used to play. It didn't feel like an empty house anymore. It felt like mine. I brewed tea and sat by the window, looking at the stars. The thought of dying alone no longer scared me. What scared me before wasn't death. It was being forgotten. And now I knew for certain I wouldn't be. Because this wasn't a story of abandonment anymore. This was a story of becoming unforgettable. But Nathan wasn't done. And neither was I. The weeks after Nathan's outburst felt strangely calm. I expected anger, maybe even guilt, to consume me. But instead, what filled my chest was something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. For the first time since Henry passed, I was living for me. Not for my son's approval. Not to fill someone else's silence. Just for me. The foundation papers were finalized on a crisp Thursday morning. I signed my name, Eleanor Thompson, with steady hands. My lawyer smiled at me, not out of pity, but with genuine admiration. Mrs. Thompson, she said softly, this will change lives. Hundreds of children will get opportunities they never imagined. Those words echoed in my heart like a hymn. I walked out of that office feeling 10 years younger. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation for Creative Futures became real faster than I imagined. The community center hosted a small ceremony, nothing extravagant, just warm. Kids ran around with paint on their faces, laughing. There was music, flowers, and a giant banner with my name on it. My name. When I stepped onto that small stage, holding the microphone with trembling hands, I looked at all those faces, children, volunteers, teachers, and I realized something powerful. I hadn't been forgotten. I had simply been misplaced. People told me once, I began, my voice shaking but steady, that I would die alone. But what they didn't understand is being alone isn't the same as being invisible. I may not have a big family by my side, but I have something just as beautiful. People who see me for who I am. The crowd clapped softly. Some smiled. A little girl, Grace, ran up and handed me a flower she'd drawn. "For you, Miss Ellie," she whispered. Tears filled my eyes. But they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that heal. A week later, Nathan called again. This time his voice wasn't sharp. It was quiet. Unsure. "Mom," he said, "I heard about the foundation."
People are talking about you.
I didn't think it was this serious." I could hear the discomfort in his tone. But there was something else too. Not love. Not yet. But a tiny crack in the wall he'd built between us. "I'm proud of what I've done, Nathan," I said softly. "I hope one day you'll be proud of me too." Silence. Then a sigh. "Maybe I didn't understand what you needed, Mom." I didn't push him. I didn't beg. I simply said, I needed to be seen. He didn't say much after that. But a week later, I noticed a small donation made to the foundation under his name. Not a phone call, not an apology, but a beginning. I knew then that sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it comes in quiet gestures. And sometimes it doesn't come at all. But either way, I wasn't living for it anymore. The days rolled on. The tulips bloomed brighter than ever. Every afternoon, children filled the community center with laughter. I started teaching them how to make handmade journals, just like the one that carried my first promise to myself. People in town began recognizing me, not as the lonely old widow at the end of Willow Lane, but as Eleanor Thompson, the woman who built something that would outlive her. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on my porch swing. The air was warm. The sky painted itself in soft gold and pink. I closed my eyes and smiled. I remembered the night I whispered that promise to myself, the night Nathan told me I'd die alone. I had believed then that being forgotten was my fate. But I had rewritten my story, line by line, choice by choice. A voice inside me whispered softly, "You did it, Ellie." And I knew, if this was how my story ended someday, it would end with my name carved not on a lonely gravestone, but in the laughter of children, the strokes of their paintbrushes, the flowers in my garden, and the walls of a community that had become my family. Maybe I would die alone, but I would live loudly, and they would never forget who I was.